The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We continue to discuss The Lost Maiden of Heaven by Geoffrey Shaw. We concluded chapter 6 last week on policemen versus soldiers, which basically is the Vietnamese and this British advisor's view of how they should go about the counterinsurgency, namely by having a police force supported by military in the hamlets, versus some of the American diplomats and so on wanted to have a more military resolution that would call for heavy forces and major engagements. But Vivian, I turn it over to you happily.
Okay, well, Chapter 7, the abrogation of Nolting's rapprochement. So we're going to see the dwindling of Nolting's influence on the Kennedy administration and his eventual removal as the ambassador. And, this is 1962, but even before that, fall of 1961, they were talking about removing Diem. And I just like this quote on the bottom of 145 that gives Nolting's view of President Diem, and also his view of what diplomacy is really about anyway. A very careful balance has to be struck between the ideal and the possible. Assuming Diem's continuance at the helm, and given his extraordinary blend of quality, fortitude, deep conviction, determination, those are the good qualities, and then lack of political instinct, lack of organizing and administrative ability, and many others. So Diem was not perfect, but he was a good man worthy of American support, so long as America stayed within the art of the possible. But as we're going to see, the American advisors to Kennedy were, they had their ideas and they were impatient about making them happen.
Do you think there's somehow embedded in the American spirit this high ideal? I mean, everybody has ideals, but possibly that we think of the exceptional state of America and our desire to help others and so on, there's this ideal to get things done and get things done as quickly as possible. Is that an American characteristic? Hard to know unless you compare with other cultures. But.
Well, I think it is. And, let's not forget that when Kennedy ran for president, this was after the American victory of World War II. So America was pretty confident that, apart from the losses of Korea, we were pretty confident that we had this military prowess, that we used it for the right reasons, defeating, Nazism in Europe and so on. And then the Kennedy campaign was all about the young, new idealists coming into Washington and replacing the old guard. It was going to be Camelot. They actually called the Kennedy administration Camelot, which is kind of interesting because, as we know, Camelot does not end well. So, anyway, but there was a lot of idealism about this new American idealism that was going to mark Kennedy's administration.
Yeah, if I could perhaps make a connection here, jumping forward a few pages, but we can always come back again. I like the fact that Nolting, is a realist in the best sense of the word here, that we have to strike a balance between the ideal, in other words, what we want to emerge, and what's actually possible. So that's what you have to take pragmatic, practical steps towards the goal, right? The goal is just not going to happen as if by magic. And then if you go on to page 152, this is an excellent piece of writing, and I think good wisdom, that new paragraph there. Mm-hmm. The American liberal idea that the pen was mightier than the sword, regardless of the facts on the ground with respect to the political and military prowess of the adversary, was based on an underlying false assumption that all the parties in a conflict want to stop the fighting more than they want to win the war. Mm-hmm. Because of their recent experience in Malaya, the British did not start from this assumption. They had found it necessary to steel themselves to accept the harsh reality that communist insurgents will keep fighting until they are destroyed, both politically and militarily. There was no point in negotiating with them before they were ready to surrender. And the British kept the pressure on them until they were. And then just below that, many of the Kennedy administration's best and brightest acted as though the communists in Southeast Asia wanted nothing more than civil rights and peaceful coexistence with the non-communists. So what we have here is idealism on the part of the best and brightest of the Kennedy administration being at loggerheads with reality. Where you allow the ideal to be something which actually blinds you to the situation on the ground.
Is there also perhaps in this a factor of not just America, but the whole Western world, the ideal of progress that really began to take hold after the scientific revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, that we can make things better. We try to do that, but kind of a non-Augustinian approach where Augustine realized, we're sinful and we're always going to be sinful. We try to do the best we can, like you say, politics of the possible, but also we're not going to establish a utopia on this planet, whether we try and do it by Marxism with the perfect society and the proletariat, is going to be in control, or through liberal democracy. I mean, you try and use the best system you can come up with, but this kind of ideal of a change is going to really make everyone peaceful, just, and happy and prosperous quickly.
Right. It's on the basis of a false anthropology, as you say, Father. It's the idea of Rousseau, of the noble savage, an 18th century idea that basically we're not sinners, that we're all basically a tabula rasa, we're just nice and clean, and it's only bad society and bad civilizations that pollute us, and we're fixable, right? And if we're fixable, then all we need is social engineering. We need the right ideals, the right ideology, and we can make everything perfect. And that's whether that's Rousseau's idealism leading to the French Revolution, or Marxist idealism leading to communist revolutions around the world. It's based upon a false understanding of who we are. As you say, Augustine didn't make that mistake.
Right. There's another realist on board here. What I like about, we mentioned last time that there's some repetition, but each time he goes around the bend, Shaw is introducing more characters, and it's the characters of these men that's so fascinating. And what we're seeing is this Harriman group on one side, wanting quick American results, and then we've got the more pragmatist realists about what's really achievable on the other side, and this group is now growing farther and farther apart. And another member of the realist group is the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, on page 150. We're going back just a little bit, but I think this quote from, I think it's from a biography, Rusk's biographer, where his faith, it's that pull-out quote in the middle there, his faith in the Anglo-Saxon tradition of law and liberty as a beacon for the entire human race led Rusk to be paradoxically a convinced anti-colonialist. So here's a guy who recognizes what we've got going for ourselves, but doesn't think we can necessarily impose that all over the world. He accurately predicted the swift and inevitable dissolution of colonial empires after World War II and thought that the United States and Britain should assist this process. Nevertheless, he was enough of a realist to leaven these views with a dose of pragmatism. He did not believe in universal American intervention to set the world right, but in the limited use of American power based on what was possible in a given situation. So there's that word possible again. So you've got the people on one side of Kennedy's team saying, let's deal with what's possible. And then you've got the other people on Kennedy's team who, by the way, are still promoting the image of Kennedy as the young idealist president who's going to make dramatic changes in the world. Kennedy's running for re-election at the time that his campaign is heating up, at the time that Diem is assassinated, right? They're very much trying to keep this image of what kind of man he is so that he'll be reelected.
And back to the remark you made, Joseph, about Rousseau and the tabula rasa, or the empty slate. Interestingly, America is one of the few countries that did begin with an almost empty slate. Of course, the Native Americans were here, but they were very dispersed, and we eliminated them. But in terms of creating a civil polity, a nation state, we kind of started from nothing, and we could. So it began with the idea, then was realized, and so that may go into American psyche too. That we think that we can start over, and we can just build something the way we think is best for it to be built.
That's actually probably a good idea. That's probably a very good observation, Father, because every other nation, well, I don't know every other nation, but anyway, most other nations, certainly in the old world, have a living tradition, for better or worse, right? That we're entangled with roots and branches, whereas America basically started from scratch and said, "Well, how do we make this work? Let's come up with a constitution. Let's make this happen." And for better or worse, that's what's happened. So.
And we had no one on our borders to contend with. I mean, basically,
right.
The Atlantic and Pacific isolated us, and
Right.
Canada was not popular. Mexico had not reached that far north to any great extent. Whereas you try to do something in Southeast Asia, you got Cambodia over there, and you got Thailand and China and Korea. They're all around you. You can't act. You can't act in a vacuum. But we got used to acting in a semi-vacuum.
We did.
These sort of geopolitical reasons for why things happen. Same thing with England, with the UK. I mean, the closest point from Dover to Calais is only 24 miles, but it makes all the difference, right? Because there's actually a sea that separates the island of Britain from the mainland of Europe. And in contrast, there's been a stability. There's not been an out invasion of the UK, with a sort of one in 1688, but 1066. So obviously that leads to some form of stability.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the geographical context, on page 153, we see that Laos is deteriorating now, which the realists in the room all saw that coming, that the Laotian neutrality deal was not going to keep Laos free of communist insurgents. And so now what's going to happen is Diem wants out of the deal. And this is going to further strain his relationship with the Kennedy administration, particularly Averell Harriman, who brokered that deal. And why? Because he can't, Diem can't protect Vietnam from people who do come over the border, do a bunch of bad stuff, and then flee over the border again. Gee, where have we seen this before? Well, in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Another classic example. The Taliban, all they had to do was cross back over into Pakistan, and we couldn't pursue them there. So history does rhyme, as the saying goes. You can't defeat an insurgency if the insurgents can hide for cover in the neighboring country, and you've got deals in place where you can't do anything about it.
Right. On the other hand, things are very, very difficult because what country has the absolute right to ride roughshod over the sovereignty of every other country? So so if it's a whole thing. Anyway, it's problematic. I do like the wording here on page 153, the beginning of that new paragraph. Going along with Harriman on Laos, who was actually going along with President Kennedy, proved to be a disaster for South Vietnam. In very short order, Diem's suspicions about the communist intentions in Laos were proved right, and Harriman's fingertips feelings, remember we discussed that in a previous discussion, were proved wrong. So in other words, the proof of the pudding, if you like, is in the eating, and Harriman's proved wrong here with disastrous consequences, but of course that doesn't lead him to moving forward in any different manner whatsoever. He doesn't learn.
Right. That's right. And then these the defections. Part of what the Diem brothers wanted to do was not just obliterate the Vietnamese communists, but win them over. And so they had these generous defection policies in place to try to win them over and reintegrate them into Vietnamese society. But the Laotian neutrality was working against that. Right. And that comes up, I think, in a later chapter as well, that that the American interference was working against the Vietnamese reintegrating those who'd been won over by communism. Now are starting to falter, but they're going to pick who they think is the winning side.
Right, and the thing is here. You say you've got elections coming up in the United States, so there's a detachment from what's going on the ground, and that Harriman on the one side and Diem, who's actually Vietnamese, on the other. Look at the bottom of page 155. This summary by Shaw. To sum up, Laotian neutrality was causing far more problems in Southeast Asia than it was solving. At the end of the day, the Americans could always go home, but the non-communist Vietnamese could not, since they were fighting for their very homes. And then look at the footnote 42 there. This point was driven home when South Vietnam collapsed under the communist assault. After the communist victory in 1975, those who were not killed outright by the victors were subject to decades in concentration and re-education camps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just above that, which was also included in that summary, but I want to point it out again, is that paragraph in the middle. What is particularly important and readily discernible in New, that's Jim's brother, concerns is that deep fears and suspicions have been aroused within the Vietnamese by the developments in Laos. These fears were based not only on the current situation, but on the Americans allowing their allies in Eastern Europe to fall into the hands of the Soviets at the end of the Second World War. And that's a whole other question. But there is this experience that people have had with our foreign aid that since we're helping people that are ocean away, we can walk away. And so they're not sure whether if they accept our help, whether we're going to back out at some point.
That's right.
It makes them very suspicious. And I can understand Diem and South Vietnamese saying, well, we can't do this on our own. We need the help of allies, and America wants to help us, so let's try and work with them. But they also have to maintain their own integrity and their own understanding. And these are Vietnamese fighting against Vietnamese.
Yep.
So it's not like some foreign enemy that you are trying to destroy.
That's right. Yep. So I'm afraid that the Laotian deal is causing the rift between Diem and the Kennedy administration to widen, and Nolting is sort of caught in the middle there because he gets very brisk messages from Harriman, basically telling him, "Look, make those people do what we say."
Right.
Well,
I think Harriman says to him at some point, basically tell Diem you're acting under instruction. In other words, you have no choice but to do as you're told. But I must admit that Nolting, for me, comes out, with flying colours in this. I really do respect the man for his integrity, his courage. His the fact he's not a careerist. He's not merely just trying to further his own career by doing what his superiors expect him or ask him or tell him to do. He's a man of principle and a man of courage, and I admire him greatly.
And he's also, because you're an ambassador, you are under the authority of the State Department, at home. And he tries to be faithful to his obligation of obedience or subservience, or at least following out orders. At the same time, he's sent there in order to be a liaison between these people and the American people, and therefore to be faithful to his task, he has to represent those people in a fair way. And when this is going on, and I was still not even a man yet, a teenager, I didn't realize the effect that the media had. I always thought it was in the papers that you can trust it. It's written down. It's not just speech that passed away. This is black on white. I see now, looking back, that what I've experienced now as an older man, a very old man, that the opinions of these reporters can be so skewed and yet so influential. It's really frightening.
It's very influential because on page back here, page 153, in the middle of the top paragraph there, Kennedy was basing his perceptions of the situation in Vietnam more on reports from his friends and the news media than on official reports sent to him by his own embassy.
Yeah, I think the danger there is as well, that he's not just thinking about what the objective scenario is on the ground, but what the impact of it is to his election chances.
Correct.
So, he's taking into account, what's the media saying about this? Not what's true, what's not true, but what
Correct.
the media saying, right? Even if
Exactly.
it's not true, it's basically it's politicians being subservient to the mass media in order to get reelected.
That's right.
And again, now we're recording this in 2023. Sorry. But, I try and sort things out, for example, with Russia and Ukraine. What is actually happening there? And I know you have to be very prudent and cautious no matter whom you read because of these very things, and likewise with Israel and Palestine. You want to be as fair as you can, as objective as you can, but it really requires tremendous discernment to sift through all the signals out, all the noise to get to the signal.
That's right. Should we go to the next chapter?
Yeah, let's
You're
make
in
a start.
charge.
Make a
In
start
fact,
on that,
are
please.
we to time yet, Thomas, on this?
We've got a few minutes.
A few minutes? Well, so Nolting's rearguard. So we're still seeing this growing division between Nolting and the other realists and the Harriman group. We get a list here on the very first page of this chapter of who's in that group, the Harriman group. And what's really interesting is on the top of 159, Shaw sums up how they're perceiving what this conflict in Vietnam is. And that is, in the judgment of these men, the insurgency in South Vietnam was a civil war caused principally by Diem's ineptitude and corruption. Thus, they logically concluded that the solution to the conflict was the removal of President Diem. So
the communists are not even the enemy anymore, right?
No.
Communists are not the problem, right?
The communists are not the problem. Diem became the problem.
Yeah. And right at the beginning of this chapter, this sets the whole thing up. As the Harriman faction worked to bring about a 180-degree turn in U.S. policy towards President Diem, it was helped along by journalists whose negative reporting soured public opinion about America's involvement in South Vietnam. So this is the dynamic. You have Harriman, who hates Diem personally, who's seeking to cause a complete volte-face, absolute 180-degree turn, so that the Americans now take a completely different approach from what took before. And why? Well, Harriman's own animus towards Diem, coupled with the work of the liberal media, who are skewing the objective data in order to pursue an agenda, and how that impacts public opinion, who believe the propaganda, and how that impacts the forthcoming election, and how the president's going to act. So very little of this has anything to do really now with the objective facts on the ground. It's all about how we spin things to get what we want out of what's happening on the ground.
Right. And I'd like to add to that picture, this idea that the media is influencing the government, State Department, and the president's administration, and they are, but the government also influences the media because the government is where they get the sources, apart from the reporters who are on the ground in Vietnam. And then again, who are their sources while they're there? We'll find more about that later in this chapter. But the State Department is very clever at feeding the media what they want the media to say. And the media is perfectly happy to soak it up because that gives them something to report. And so it's kind of an incestuous relationship between newspapers like the Wall Street, not Wall Street Journal so much on the government, but the Washington Post and the New York Times. They absolutely depend on government sources for their information.
Yeah.
A source in administrations, Ted, a source close to the action said it's all
Oh, yeah.
unnamed sources. Yeah.
Or even if they're named sources.
Well, yeah.
Time, Thomas is giving us the signal, so maybe we should say ta-ta for now.
Tough luck for now?
No, ta-ta.
Oh, ta-ta for now. All right. God bless you. Ta-ta. And God bless you, too.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.